New Year's Eve 1994, a Russian commander hears 3 words on his radio. Welcome to hell. Hours later, Russia's elite 131st Maikop Brigade is trapped at Grozny's railway station, their T-72 tanks erupting in fire, ambushed by fighters who turned columns into charnel houses. How did Grachev's promised 2-hour victory become Russia's greatest armored disaster since World War II? And why did they repeat the same fatal mistakes in Ukraine decades later? The answer begins with hubris rolling into a kill zone. No tank was built to survive. At noon on December 31st, 1994, Russian armored columns rumbled toward Grozny, engines roaring over the empty streets. Defense Minister Pavel Grachev had promised the city would fall in 2 hours, boasting that a single parachute regiment could take the Chechen capital without a fight. The orders from Moscow were clear: advance quickly, expect only scattered resistance, and show the world how swiftly Russian steel could crush a breakaway republic. No one in the command staff seemed to recall how similar promises ended in Budapest and Berlin. The 131st Maikop Brigade led the drive, fielding 1,469 troops, 26 T-72A tanks, 42 BMP infantry fighting vehicles, and 16 artillery pieces. Alongside them, the 81st Motor Rifle Regiment brought 1,331 men, 31 tanks, mostly T-80BV models, and 96 BMP vehicles. The columns stretched for miles, heavy armor at the front, support vehicles trailing behind. Tank crews sat behind cold steel, scanning for threats that never materialized. Their commanders, following Grachev's script, pushed forward with confidence. The troops were told to expect little more than sporadic sniper fire or a handful of barricades. Instead, they found silent streets and shuttered windows. No extra reactive armor was bolted on before the advance. Infantry support was thin, with many units short on dismounted troops. The plan was to overwhelm any resistance by mass and momentum. As the first tanks rolled past the city's outskirts, the radio crackled with routine reports. Nothing out of the ordinary. In those early hours, the only thing thicker than the fog was the sense of absolute certainty at the top. Russian armor was about to meet a lesson in urban warfare that no amount of confidence could deflect. By 1 o'clock, the 131st Maikop Brigade reached Grozny's railway station. Tanks and BMP infantry fighting vehicles arranged themselves in a loose ring around the building, engines idling, crews tense but unchallenged. The silence felt unnatural. No gunfire, no barricades, only the distant echo of tracks and the faint crackle of radios. Chechen commander Aslan Maskadov had studied the city's map for weeks, marking every intersection, every alley, every rooftop that overlooked the main approach routes. His fighters melted into 5-story apartment blocks, post office annexes and the depot, carrying RPGs and machine guns up narrow stairwells. The Russian columns, stretched thin and exposed, had driven straight into a kill box. Chechen doctrine called for disabling the lead and trailing vehicles first. Classic ambush geometry. As soon as the last truck cleared the intersection, RPG teams hidden in basements and upper floors opened fire. The first T-72 in the column lurched to a stop, smoke pouring from its engine deck, while the rearmost BMP burst into flames. With both ends blocked, the rest of the convoy was trapped in the open. Fields of fire overlapped from every angle. RPG teams arced down from rooftops, slamming into turret rings and side armor. Meanwhile, shots from basement windows targeted the underbellies and driver hatches, zones the T-72s could not cover with their main guns. The station itself became a furnace as incendiaries set the roof ablaze, forcing Russian infantry to take shelter inside. Every attempt to maneuver only tightened the noose. Maskhadov's layered trap had closed, sealing hundreds of men and dozens of armored vehicles inside a geometry of death. Colonel Ivan Savin's last hours played out inside a ring of burning vehicles and dead silence on the radio. As darkness fell on January 2nd, he gathered what was left of his command: wounded men, exhausted officers, and a single battered BTR. 40 wounded were loaded inside, the last hope for anyone still alive at the Grozny railway station. Savin himself climbed aboard, knowing the odds. There was no answer to his calls for artillery or rescue. Other Russian units, scattered across the city or celebrating the New Year, never reached them. The BTR rolled out into the dark, its driver steering by memory and luck. But the streets were not empty. The vehicle veered in the wrong direction, deeper toward the city center, before doubling back. Chechen fighters were waiting. Rocket-propelled grenades and automatic fire tore into the armored shell. Only 13 men crawled out alive, each one captured within minutes by Chechen gunmen. 7 never made it that far. Shrapnel from an airburst grenade tore through his face as he tried to lead from the front. He died beside the wrecked vehicle, surrounded by the men he had tried to save. Nearly all the officers of the 131st Maikop Brigade were killed in those final hours. By the time the shooting stopped, the command structure was gone. For the survivors, there would be no organized escape, only the chaos of small groups fleeing through ruined streets, hunted at every turn. Inside Grozny's concrete maze, the T-72's reputation for invincibility crumbled against simple geometry and physics. Each tank's main gun could only depress 5 degrees below the horizontal and elevate to just 15 degrees above it. In theory, this was enough for open terrain. In a city built on vertical lines, it left entire angles unprotected. Chechen fighters took positions in basements and on rooftops, waiting for columns to pass. The moment a tank's barrel swept by, RPG teams fired upwards from cellar windows or down from 5th-floor balconies. The shells struck side armor, rear engine decks, and turret rings, zones the T-72's designers never intended to face direct attack. Without extra reactive armor bolted to their flanks or turrets, most tanks were vulnerable to even basic RPG-7s. Shaped charges punched through steel meant to stop shells from the front, not the side or rear. In the chaos, crews tried to rotate turrets and return fire, but their guns could not reach the angles where the enemy hid. Some tanks attempted to pivot in place, exposing even more weak spots as they turned. Others simply burned in intersections, their ammunition cooking off in violent bursts. Infantry support was almost non-existent. With few dismounted troops, there was no one to clear buildings or suppress RPG teams. Tank commanders, locked inside their vehicles, could only listen as impacts rang out across their hulls. The absence of foot soldiers turned armor into a target rather than a spear. The city's architecture became a force multiplier for the defenders. For every tank destroyed, the explanation was mechanical: angles the gun could not reach, armor the RPG-7s could breach, and a battlefield designed to punish anything that moved without eyes on the ground. After the fighting ended, Russian recovery teams hauled 225 battered tank hulls back to the Kubinka proving ground outside Moscow. Analysts in white lab coats combed through the wreckage, cataloging every impact and burn mark. The data was impossible to ignore. 62 tanks were examined in detail, and the result was stark. 98% of penetrations struck areas left exposed, places where explosive reactive armor had never been installed. Heat maps traced RPG entry points along the sides, rear engine decks, turret rings, and driver hatches. The pattern repeated across hull after hull. In February 1995, General Lieutenant Galkin presented the findings to the Ministry of Defense. Russian armor had been gutted wherever protection ran thin. Procurement of gas turbine T-80 tanks was halted. New doctrine dictated that infantry would lead, with tanks in support. For the first time, anti-aircraft vehicles were ordered forward, their guns able to reach rooftops and upper floors where tanks could not. Disarray spread far beyond the burned-out hulks and ruined streets. Russia's elite Spetsnaz troops, trained for deep operations, wandered Grozny for days with no contact, no food, no water. They asked foreign journalists, "Who is fighting whom here?" The myth of invincibility collapsed, not only in blood and steel, but in the eyes of the soldiers themselves. By the end of the first week, many surrendered to Chechen fighters, shattering the image of the Russian bear in a single campaign. The lesson was written in the rubble. Tactical arrogance and institutional blindness brought defeat. Yet in August 1996, Chechen fighters infiltrated Grozny again, this time against 12,000 Russian troops. They used the same ambush geometry, the same RPG kill zones, and Russian armor fell victim to the very tactics ignored 2 years earlier. Decades later, in February 2022, Russian columns rolled toward Kiev expecting easy victory. Once more, unsupported tanks were ambushed and destroyed, proof that the lessons of Grozny went unlearned. The message from Grozny echoed across generations. Urban warfare still shreds armor, regardless of era or flag. When armies ignore hard-won lessons, like Grozny's 77% tank losses, history repeats in burned steel and shattered columns. The cost is not just machines, it is lives erased by overconfidence. In war, forgetting is fatal. Share your thoughts below.